This is Richard with JR PROPO D-Force Aviation, and this is the 8th in a series of videos designed to help the viewer program their Elite or Matrix transmitter for electric flybarless helicopter use. Safety is a primary concern. The programming of the radio is to be done with only the transmitter on. The model should not be powered up, and the motor should not be connected. This is the second of 2 videos that will include the use of trim input switches. In this video, we're going to convert the throttle trim tab to a trim input switch. We're then going to map the control of the governed throttle curves to that trim input switch. We're assuming, for purposes of this video, that the governed throttle settings in the ESC being used are actually controlled by the throttle curve in the transmitter. If your ESC uses fixed throttle curves, not for the actual RPM, but as switching points for RPM levels that are pre-programmed into your ESC through a programmer or computer, this video will not be of any use to you. For those types of ESCs, please refer to the manufacturer's instructions. Before we begin, I want to once again thank JR user Nigel Higgs for this idea. Okay, before we start, we're going to take a look at how we would change the settings in the throttle curves as they are right now in the programming. We're going to touch the menu button. We're now on the first page of the function menu. We're going to touch the throttle curve button or icon in the lower right-hand corner. Under confirm servo hold, we're going to touch yes. And here's the curve as we set it up in a previous video. Now again, not everybody uses this kind of curve. I learned a very long time ago and still like, in my normal mode, a throttle curve that starts at 0. Most people with modern ESCs with good governing and really good slow starts will never do this. But for purposes of demonstration, I'm going to show both kinds of throttle curves. So let's say we're out at the field and we're running a 50% throttle curve, which in reality, probably people wouldn't do because their RPM will be too low. But let's just say it's at 50%. And we go, this is too low. I need it to come up to 55. So we're going to have to change each point in the curve up to 55%. So we'll start with our first point and we'll raise it 5 points. Now we have a bump in our curve. So now we have to go to the second point and we have to raise this one too. If we go into our flat governed curves, which are only 3-point curves, we're going to flip into stunt 1 now.
Stunt 1.
Okay, we're now in stunt 1. If we want to raise this curve and keep it flat, we still have to raise 3 points in the curve individually. Now, when you're out in the field tuning a helicopter, you can do it this way, but it consumes a lot of time. You would think there has to be a better way, and there is. I'm going to bring these back down to 50% for our starting point again.
Normal.
Now what we're going to do next is convert the throttle trim tab to a trim input switch so that the flat portion of the normal throttle curve can be controlled with the throttle trim tab, and so that the stunt 1 and stunt 2 curves can be controlled by the throttle trim tab. Okay, we're going to press the back button to back out. We're now on the first page of the function menu. We want to go to the second page of the system menu, so we're going to touch the system button at the top. We're going to touch the arrow on the right of the screen, and we're now on the second page of the system menu. As we did with the trim input switches for the gyro function in the previous video, we're going to touch the trim input switch button. Okay, now we've already used the first 3 trim input switches for our gyro gain controls. We're going to use trim input switch 03 for our throttle trim tab. We're going to touch the box where it says inhibit. Now in the small window labeled mode, we're going to touch the direct button. We're going to move over here to input range and change the size of the steps from 4 to 10. Press the red X to back out. On the right, we're going to touch the icon or image of the switch. Now in the switch select screen, we're going to touch flight mode. In the flight mode window, we're going to select normal, stunt 1, and stunt 2, then press the red X to back out. Under logic, we're going to change this from on to or. And now we're going to touch the image of the throttle trim tab. Now in the enlarged view of the left side of the transmitter, we're going to touch the throttle trim tab button again. Now we've seen this window in the previous video. This time it's labeled T3, which is the designation for the throttle trim tab. We're going to touch position 0 and position 2. And touch the red X to back out. Going to touch back to back out. We're back on the switch select screen. We're going to touch the physical back button on the face of the transmitter. And now we're back to the trim input switch screen. To the right of trim input switch 03, we're going to touch the inhibit button. Note that the word inhibit is highlighted in the upper left here. We're going to touch the trim tab for the throttle again. We're going to touch it again here in the enlarged view. Note that inhibit is no longer highlighted. We're going to press the physical back button. We're going to press the physical back button again. Now back in the system menu, we need to go back into the function menu, so we're going to touch the function button. And next we're going to touch the throttle curve button or icon at the lower right portion of the screen. Under confirm servo hold, we're going to touch yes. And now we have the throttle curve screen we were looking at earlier. Once in this screen, we're going to press the center button, which is the submenu button. And here we're presented with 5 buttons: delay setting, trim input setting, hovering throttle setting, throttle trim offset, and curve type setting. We're going to touch trim input setting. We're now in the throttle curve submenu for position 0, which is our normal flight mode. Under trim input, it says inhibit. We're going to touch that. And we're going to touch trim input switch 03. Okay, where it said inhibit before, it now says TIS 03. Now, this is the only curve we have that has 5 points. And this, the intention here being was to, for an old-fashioned normal curve, start at 0 and then ramp up for the governed portion of the curve to a nice flat curve. We don't want to change the 0 position with the trim input switch, but we do want it to be able to control points 1, 2, 3, and H. So we're going to check these boxes for 1, 2, 3, and H. We're going to press the back button to back out. Now we're going to change into our stunt 1 flight mode.
Stunt 1.
We have the 3-point curves that we set up earlier on in the videos. We're going to press the submenu button. We've seen these choices before. We're going to go to the bottom where it says curve type setting, and we're going to touch the button. We have 2 choices here, normal and governed. We're going to touch governed. The curve has now been changed from a 3-point to a 2-point curve. We're going to press our submenu button again. And we're going to touch trim input setting. Under Trim Input is the box that says Inhibit. We're going to touch it. Once again, we're going to select Trim Input Switch 3. Now, activated curve point. Again, these are the points that the Trim Input Switch can affect. We're going to touch L and H, both points on the curve. We're going to hit the back button. We're going to switch into our Stunt 2 flight mode.
Stunt 2.
And we're going to repeat this process. Okay, I'm going to flip into normal mode.
Normal.
Okay, I'm going to raise the throttle stick up so that we can see what happens when I move the throttle trim tab. Notice the entire curve is moving as I raise and lower the trim tab. Now the reason I raise the throttle stick is if I put it down here to the lowest point, we won't have any reading here because that point doesn't move. Okay, we're going to go into Stunt 1.
Stunt 1.
And we're going to raise the throttle curve. And we'll repeat this for Stunt 2.
Stunt 2.
Let's go back to normal mode for a moment. Okay, so let's say I'm hovering my helicopter. I'm going to put the throttle up to about where one would normally hover. And the RPM is a little bit too low. I just reach over while it's hovering and bump the trim tab a little bit at a time until I get the RPM where I want it. Likewise for the other flight modes,
Stunt 1.
I can change the curve up or down as I feel like in flight with the trim input switch.
Normal.
Again, this is a feature that should only be used by experienced RC helicopter pilots. In the next video, we're going to talk about setting X-bus in the transmitter, binding the receiver to the transmitter, setting fail-safe, and templates. Thank you.